Remote Participation Manager for this session. Please note that this session is being recorded and is governed by the ICANN expected standards of behavior. During this session, questions and comments submitted in the chat will only be read aloud if put in the proper form, as I have noted in the chat. I will read questions and comments aloud during the time set by the chair or moderator of this session. Interpretation for this session will include English, French, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, and Russian. Click on the interpretation icon in Zoom and select the language you will listen to during this session. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand in the Zoom room, and once the session facilitator calls upon your name, kindly unmute your microphone and take the floor. Before speaking, ensure you have selected the language you will speak from the interpretation menu. Please state your name for the record and the language you will speak if speaking a language other than English. When speaking, be sure to mute all other devices and notifications. Please speak clearly and at a reasonable pace to allow for accurate interpretation. This session includes automated real-time transcription. Please note this transcript is not official or authoritative. To view the real-time transcription, click on the closed caption button in the Zoom toolbar. To ensure transparency of participation in ICANN's multi-stakeholder model, we ask that you sign in to Zoom sessions using your full name. For example, a first name and a last name or surname. You may be removed from the session if you do not sign in using your full name. Welcome everyone once again. I would like to welcome our presenters today, Chantal Dirksen and Ozan Sahin, our colleagues, ICANN colleagues from Policy Team. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Chantal to start the presentation.
Thank you, Siranush, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. As Siranush mentioned, my name is Chantal Dirksen, and I'm based out of our LA office. My colleague, Ozan Sahin, who you'll be hearing from shortly, is based in our Istanbul office. And today we will be talking to you about the policy development and advice development processes at ICANN. As you can see on the screen in front of you, our discussion will be divided into 6 sessions. First, I will talk about what our team does and how policies developed within our 3 supporting organizations. Then Ozan will talk to you about the specifics of policy development and advice development processes. And then I'll highlight a few of the current policy development processes that are ongoing. And finally, we'll open up the session for discussions. So what is the policy development support function? The policy development support function is a team of 36 community management and subject matter experts. In total, our team members are fluent in 9 different languages. We work across 6 different time zones and are collectively located in 9 different countries. This enables ICANN to ensure that the community is well supported in its work. What do we do to support the community? We help facilitate community and working group projects, and this includes calls and sessions, some of which you have or will be attending this week. We also provide subject matter expertise on the various policy topics covered within the working groups, and we also help with some research and drafting. We're the team that manages the various processes related to policy development, which includes the working groups, the public comment feature that you'll hear about more towards the end of this presentation, and the Secretariat support services that work behind the scenes to ensure that all the community sessions that we support run smoothly. We also work to inform stakeholders, and so this includes communication materials about how policy work at ICANN happens, the pre- and post-meeting reports, which are known as the Outlook and Outcomes reports, respectively, and we'll also share more about that later on in the presentation. So why do we do it? As you know, the ICANN mission is to coordinate policy development related to the Internet system of unique identifiers. So at ICANN, the approach to policy development is a unique form of governance that we refer to as bottom-up decision-making. And this bottom-up approach to decision-making involves consensus-driven policy development and advice development work with our community volunteers. In other words, bottom-up consensus-driven work is at the core of the ICANN mission. Now we'll look at the structure of the ICANN ecosystem itself to understand how this policy development happens. Within ICANN, we talk about it being made up of three components: the ICANN community, the ICANN board of directors, and the ICANN organization, which is often shortened to ICANN.org. And now at a high level, the role of the community is to develop policy. The role of the board is to review and adopt the policies recommended by the community. And the role of ICANN.org is to implement the policies that are adopted by the board. The ICANN board also oversees the performance of ICANN as an organization. This distribution and decentralization of power and responsibility works as a strong system of checks and balances where we each hold one another accountable. Now, when we say that the ICANN communities were policies developed, we're talking about the community volunteers and the community structures within which they operate. The volunteers include experts and people from all over the world who are coming together to make important decisions about how this ecosystem works. As you can imagine, the views are very diverse, and the community structures and processes are in place to make sure that the work is approached in an effective way and to ensure that all these different perspectives can be heard. What's important to understand is how this community works together through this bottom-up process to make the policy recommendations, to give advice, to conduct reviews related to ICANN's mission, and to propose implementation solutions for problems that fall within ICANN's mission and scope.
Chantal, if I may request you to slow down a bit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Siranush. My apologies. Within the ICANN community, there are two different categories. The first are the supporting organizations, or the SOs, which are the three groups responsible for developing the policy recommendations in different areas related to IP addresses, generic top-level domains, and the country code top-level domains. The second core category in ICANN refers to the advisory committees, or the ACs. These include representatives from governments and international treaty organizations, root server operators, internet security experts, and internet end users. These are the four groups that give advice and make recommendations to the ICANN board. Within the first group, the supporting organizations, we'll talk about the three that develop policy. And so moving from top to bottom, the first one is the Address Supporting Organization, or the ASO. Within the ASO, there are the Regional Internet Registries, or RIRs, each with its own geographic region, and they are responsible for allocating the IP addresses in different parts of the world. These RIRs form a council called the ASO Address Council, and their council has representatives from each of the RIRs and focuses on global Internet Protocol address policy. So that's the policy development that happens at a regional level on the number side of the community. And as you can imagine, there are also global policies that affect more than one region. And those policies are developed through the ASO itself. The other two SOs are related to domain name policy. The CCNSO, or the Country Code Name Supporting Organization, works on the global policies related to country code top-level domains, or CCTLDs. Examples of those that you might be familiar with, for example, are .br for Brazil or .uk for the United Kingdom. And then finally, we have the Generic Name Supporting Organization, or the GNSO, that is focused on generic top-level domains, or GTLDs. The one you probably know most, of course, is .com or .org. Since 2012, the pool of GTLDs has grown. There has been a significant expansion of the GTLD space through the new GTLD program. With this growth, the need for new policies has also increased. Within the GNSO, it's the GNSO Council that serves as the governing body to supervise policy development. The Council represents many different parts of the ICANN community, including the contracted parties, which are the registries and the registrars that hold the contracts with ICANN. It also includes representatives from other groups such as civil society, business, and other commercial interests. Now with this, I would like to turn it over to my colleague Ozan to go into detail about the different SO policy development processes and to talk to you about the advisory committees.
Thank you, Chantal, and hello, everyone. My name is Ozan Shahin. I'm also a member of the Policy Development Support Team, working out of ICANN Middle East and Africa Regional Office located in Istanbul. And I will start with the multi-stakeholder policy development. This infographic in display illustrates the policy development process for each of the three supporting organizations. It is available online in all UN languages plus Portuguese and Turkish. So if you're interested, GS is managed by the GNSO Council. Let's go to the next slide, which provides more detailed information on how the GNSO Council is structured. There are two houses within the GNSO Council. The two stakeholder groups that you see in the middle of the chart, the registries stakeholder group and the registrar stakeholder group, together they form the contracted parties house. Simply because these structures have contracts with ICANN. Whereas the two stakeholder groups on the left and right, the commercial stakeholder group and non-commercial stakeholder group, they together form the non-contracted parties house. Commercial stakeholder group is composed of three constituencies: business constituency, intellectual property constituency, and the internet service providers and connectivity providers constituency. And we have non-commercial users constituency and not-for-profit organizational concerns constituency under the non-commercial stakeholder group. Each of these stakeholder groups appoint a certain number of counselors to the GNSO Council. To sum up, this slide shows how different interests are represented within the GNSO Council. Let's go to the next slide and focus on the GNSO policy development process. The first step is issue identification. In this step, the GNSO Council, ICANN board, or an advisory committee identifies an issue, and they come up with the challenge or problem in mind. Then the GNSO Council considers two things. First, whether this issue is within the scope of their mission, and also whether or not this issue would result in a policy. At the end of the first step, the GNSO Council makes the determination whether it wants to undertake a particular effort. Under ICANN bylaws, every supporting organization has a specific mission, and they cannot go outside of this remit. So in other words, this step is to make sure the issue is within the remit of the GNSO. After the identification of the issue, the next step is scoping. At the request of the GNSO Council, the Policy Development Support Team drafts and publishes a preliminary issue report. This report focuses on some questions that the potential policy development process can answer. This report is published for public comment. This is where there are opportunities for outside input from the entire ICANN community. I'd like to take a moment and point out the arrows on the left and right-hand side of the policy development process slide. These arrows refer to the steps in the PDP process or policy development process, where input from the community is sought. And you will continue to see these arrows on the next policy development process slides. So going back to the final step of the scoping phase, following the public comment period, a final issue report is prepared reflecting the comments received during the public consultation period. And then the report is submitted to the GNSO Council for the Council's consideration. Third phase in the GNSO PDP process is the initiation phase, where the GNSO Council looks at the final issue report and votes on whether to initiate a post-development process. If the Council decides to initiate a PDP, then they develop and adopt a charter for the PDP working group. In the final step of the initiation phase, the GNSO Council calls for volunteers to form the PDP working group. Next slide, please. Once the working group is formed, it starts its deliberations through mailing list exchanges, teleconferences, and when possible, face-to-face meetings, and this process may take a couple of years. The working group consults with the ICANN community and then comes up with an initial report. Then a public comment proceeding is opened for this report. And eventually, the working group reviews the comments received and decides whether to incorporate these comments in the final report. And then the working group submits its final report to the GNSO Council. In the next phase, the GNSO Council reviews the final report and considers adoption. If adopted, then the GNSO Council submits the final report to the ICANN board. Once the final report is submitted to the ICANN board, the board consults the ICANN community through a public comment proceeding. The board receives input from the community before making its decision, and then the board votes on the recommendations in the final report. If the board adopts the recommendations, then they become the policy, and that is the end of the policy development process and the beginning of the implementation phase. Can we go to the next slide? So the CCNSO, or Country Code Name Supporting Organization, work on global policies relating to country code top-level domain name policies, such as, .br for Brazil or .uk for United Kingdom, as my colleague Chantal mentioned during her portion. And let's focus on the CCNSO post-development process. If we can go to the next slide, this process is very similar to the GNSO post-development process in that you have a phase to identify the issue. Then there's a phase where it is determined whether or not the issue is within the scope of the CCNSO. And in the next phase, CCNSO Council approves the issue report and initiates a PDP. The CCNSO Council gives public notice and opens a public comment period. And on the next slide, you will see then the working group phase begins. After the initial report of the working group, another public comment period takes place. And then the final report and recommendations of the working group are developed and submitted to the CCNSO Council. There is a difference here when it comes to voting on the report of the working group. In the CCNSO post-development process, there's a two-stage voting within the CCNSO. First, the CCNSO Council votes, and then CCNSO members vote. To put in other words, there's an extra stage here where all CCNSO members vote on the report of the working group, even if they are not represented on the CCNSO Council. And after that, the final report is submitted to the ICANN board. So let's now move to the address supporting organization. Address supporting organization, Address Council, is composed of 15 volunteers, 3 from each of the 5 regional internet registries. The remit of the address supporting organization within ICANN is specifically scoped around global number resources. Although there's a lot of regional policy development work that happens at the 5 regional internet registries. ASO's remit at ICANN, it is only limited to global policies. This slide shows how global policy development process works in the ASO. After the issue identification phase, ASO Address Council assembles a team called the Policy Proposal Facilitator Team and starts to track the issue. Address supporting organization policy development process usually requires a specific outcome or action by the IANA numbering services. That is why the 5 regional internet registries and the communities within the 5 regional internet registries have to develop and approve exactly the same policy. The Policy Proposal Facilitator Team makes sure that policy development process was followed in every region, and then it was approved. And finally, the proposal has to go to the Address Council for approval. In the ICANN board review phase, the Address Supporting Organization Address Council submits the proposal to the ICANN board. The ICANN board may accept or reject the proposal, or the board may request changes to the proposal or take no action. The 5 regional registries are listed on the slide. So namely, these are AFRINIC, APNIC, ARIN, LACNIC, and RIPE NCC. Let's now move on to advice development and how advice is developed in the 4 advisory committees. So you see the 4 advisory committees on the slide. At-large advisory committee provides advice from end users. At-large advisory committee is composed of 15 members, 2 from each of the 5 regional at-large organizations, and 5 members appointed by the ICANN nominating committee. At-large advisory committee, or ALAC, is supported by more than 200 at-large structures and volunteers. Moving down to governmental advisory committee, it provides input from governments on public policy issues, particularly on interactions with policies and national laws or international agreements. Another advisory committee is Root Server System Advisory Committee, which provides input from root server operators on the operation, administration, security, and integrity of the Internet's root server system. And finally, Security and Stability Advisory Committee advises on matters related to the security and integrity of the Internet's naming and address allocation systems. So on the slide, you see another infographic. Let me put in the chat the link to the English version of this infographic, and start with at-large advisory committee and its advice development process. Any at-large community member can raise issues in the at-large advice development process, and then the at-large advisory committee or the ALAC discusses the issues to determine the impact on individual end users. ALAC designates issue shepherds to participate in the policy development and then lead the drafting of ALAC responses. At-large advisory committee makes sure to check with the regional at-large organizations or the RALOs, and the RALOs check with their at-large structures. They ultimately go to the at-large advisory committee, which approves the statement. If ratified, ALAC sends advice to ICANN board, ICANN organization, supporting organizations, and other advisory committees or other ICANN community members for consideration. Moving right to GAC, any GAC member or observer can bring up an issue for discussion. In addition, ICANN board may seek GAC advice on a particular topic. GAC chair solicits input from GAC members, observers, and working groups. And then GAC chair summarizes the input received with the aim of reaching consensus. Then the input providers contribute to draft advice. If consensus is reached, then the GAC chair issues GAC communique, which is the advisory the GAC develops during ICANN public meetings, or other formal written statement to the ICANN board. Again, moving right to the Root Server System Advisory Committee, or RSEC. RSEC is composed of representatives from the organizations responsible for operating global root service. There is also RSEC caucus, which is composed of DNS experts who have an interest in the root server system, broadening the base of diverse technical expertise available for RSEC work. Any RSEC or RSEC caucus member can propose work items and can submit a statement of work for RSEC's consideration. If approved, RSEC sets up a work party. The work party works on the topic and drafts a document. After a review period, the work party leader sends the outcome document to RSEC, and then RSEC votes on the document. If approved, RSEC publishes the document and provides its advice. Finally, SSEC is very similar to RSEC in how they develop advice to the ICANN board and the ICANN community. SSEC also sets up work parties to work on issues identified. And then Security and Stability Advisory Committee, or SSEC, needs to approve the work party's draft document, which is followed by the publication of the document as SSEC advice. With that, if we can go to the next slide, I will turn it back to my colleague, Chantal, who will provide some examples of the current policy development processes. Chantal?
Thank you, Ozan. On the screen in front of you, you'll see 5 policy development processes that are currently ongoing at ICANN. And we'll talk about them from the top to bottom. The first one is the 3rd PDP of the CCNSO. And part 1 of this proposed policy focuses on the retirement of CCTLDs, which is currently under consideration by the ICANN board. The second part of this policy development process is developing a review mechanism on the delegation, transfer, and revocation of CCTLDs. Now, there's no session for ICANN73, but the work is ongoing. And you can find more information about that on the CCNSO website. Next is CCNSO PDP-4, which is developing a process for the deselection of internationalized domain name CCTLDs. The outcome of this PDP will replace the current fast track process that's being used. And there are 2 subgroups currently reviewing specific efforts related to IDNs, and they're coordinating with the GNSO efforts. And this ties nicely into the 3rd PDP on the screen, which refers to the expedited policy development process on internationalized domain names, or the ePDP on IDNs. Management of variant labels and how the guidelines can be updated are the 2 issues that the group is currently working on. And as I mentioned, the ICANN board has asked the GNSO and the CCNSO to coordinate on this policy topic. The 4th PDP on the screen is the ePDP on specific curative rights protections for international governmental organizations, or IGOs. We refer to this one as the ePDP on IGOs. Its remit is narrowly focused on resolving outstanding recommendations related to rights protection mechanisms, PDP. And a final report has been published, and the working group is on track to deliver its recommendations by April. The last PDP I'd like to highlight is the Transfer Policy PDP. Now, the transfer policy is the oldest consensus policy at ICANN. It's been in place since 1999, but hasn't been reviewed since 2014. privacy regulations such as GDPR have impacted policy related to registrars, and so this PDP seeks to update the policy. Now, Transfer Policy had their session yesterday, so if you want to go and listen to a recording on that, you're able to. And all the PDPs that do have sessions, those recordings will be on the website as well. I want to also note that there are 2 operational design phases, or ODPs, underway, and these tie into the implementation side of policy. And the 2 ODPs relate to subsequent procedures and also the System for Standardized Access or Disclosure, which we also call the SAD model. There's also one operational design assessment, also known as an ODA, on the SAD. And this is where ICANN org is considering and evaluating the board decisions. Now, we've talked to you a lot about the different policy processes, the different policy work at ICANN. We want to now shift the focus to how you can participate. The first way is you can join one of the open community groups. This is a great way to get to know other people with similar interests, make contributions, or you can contribute to a position statement that the group is forming. You could also help draft public comment submissions and help guide working group members. The second way is you can sign up as an individual working group member as an observer. This will allow you to follow along and see what the work is about in one of the working groups. The final way that you could participate is either as an individual or as a part of a group, and that is to submit a public comment. Whoops, there we go. My apologies. On the screen in front of you, you can see an example of a current open public comment proceeding. Now, public comment is the process that gives the ICANN community, the internet stakeholders, and the general public an opportunity to provide direct input on the ICANN work and policies. As you can see on the screen in front of you, you're able to submit a comment as an individual, as an informal group, or you can contribute to a public comment proceeding via a particular part of the community. And you can see examples of those on the right-hand side of the screen. Via the public comment feature on the ICANN website, you can also see what opportunities are open at any given time. So with this, we'd like to now open the floor to the Q&A portion of the session. And then before we leave, we'll share a resource slide with you that can help you track the different agendas and materials that have been prepared for ICANN73. And as Siranush mentioned, these slides are available to download on the URL for this session itself. With this, Siranush, I will turn the floor over to you to facilitate the Q&A portion.
Thank you, Chantel, and thank you, Ozan, for this informative presentation. And thanks for all the links published. I will compile all the links and send to ICANN73 fellows also via email, so they have it in their mailboxes. And we have several questions already posted, so I will start with the first question asked by Samik. What happens with the issue if it is not implemented as a policy? Will it be brought back to the table again? Will the previous comments process on the issue influence the issue, or will it be dealt as a fresh issue? Who would like to take this? So if the issue is not implemented as a policy and it comes back to the table, will the previous comment process influence on this issue, or it is considered as a new, fresh issue?
I see Ozan's hand is raised. I will give him the floor.
Thank you, Chantal. Hi, Siranush, and thank you for this question. Frankly, I never thought of a policy approved by, proposed by an supporting organization and approved by an ICANN org, by the ICANN board, to not be implemented by ICANN org, because ICANN organization is responsible for implementing the policies that have been approved. So, I never thought of such a situation. I don't know if it happened in the past, but I just don't think so, because this is the responsibility of the ICANN organization to implement the policies that have been approved. But on a side note, recently there are efforts on enhancing the implementation phases of the approved policies. So you may have heard about operational design phases for some of the board approved policies. So the ICANN organization is working with, again, community to see how best to implement the approved policies. I don't know, Chantal, if you have anything to add to that.
Thanks, Ozan. The only thing I can think of mentioning here is that if by some chance a policy recommendation that a specific SO has approved and submitted to the board for consideration, if the board rejects it, then it would go back to that specific community for further consideration. But as Ozan mentioned, once a policy is approved by the board, then it goes into the implementation phase.
Thank you. The next question is again from Samik. How much time does a policy take to be implemented? Can an implemented policy be updated? And if yes, then what's the process for this?
Ozan, if I may, thank you, Siranush and Samik, for the question. This ties really nicely into the PDP slide that I shared. It's a very good question. The oldest policy that I mentioned was the transfer policy, and that's currently in the policy development phase right now as a PDP. It was last revisited in 2014. So the fact that the community decided that it's time to revise it can show you that these policies can be revisited, but it's up to the community to decide.
Thank you. The question related also to PDPs from Malut. Can you elaborate the difference between PDP and ePDP, and who makes the decision? Who would like to take this question? The difference between ePDP and PDP. Chantal, Ozan?
Oh, okay, thanks. This is Chantal. So I will attempt to answer this. That's a very good question. It's up to the SO. So for example, the expedited PDPs that are currently open are all within the GNSO, and it's up to council to make that distinction. Based on the name, as you can probably surmise, an expedited PDP means that it should move faster than a regular PDP. But again, it's up to the working group that actually develops the policies.
Thank you, Chantal. And the next question from Keolebo Jill. At what stage in the PDP are ACs, advisory committees, are engaged? Are they engaged since the starting process, or there is a specific stage when they are engaged in PDP process?
Siranush, this is Ozan speaking,
please.
If I may.
Yes, please.
I think, Chantal, you are still in control of the slides. So if you don't mind going back to, for instance, slide 14, let's provide an example from the GNSO policy development process. And, you know, on these slides, you saw some arrows on the left and right-hand side. During these phases, the arrows refer to the opportunities where rest of the ICANN community can engage in the policy development process. So, for instance, if you look at the first arrow in the identification phase, the GNSO Council, ICANN board, or an AC identifies an issue. So outside of the GNSO community, NAC can also chime in the identification phase. So moving down, looking at the second arrow, rest of ICANN community can still engage in the post-development process when the preliminary issue report is open for public comment period and provide their comments. So similarly, if you look at the third arrow, in the formation of the working group, again, ICANN community can appoint members to the working group and be part of the working group that's being formed. So these arrows really indicate the opportunities for engagement from the other sides of the ICANN community. I hope that answers. Siranush, I see you're speaking, but you are muted, so you may want to come off mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Ozan. If there is any additional questions you would like to ask, you can post in the chat, or as a follow-up, you can raise your hand. And we have another question from Aisha, who is asking about the difference between working of RSAC and SSAC. So she would like to join SSAC, but she is confused and would like to know more about the difference between those two communities. Ozan, I see your hand.
Thank you, Siranush. And thank you, Aisha, for the question. The advice development process for both RSAC and SSAC is really similar. And during the identification of the issue phase and during the setting up of working groups, these are really similar. When they set up working groups to work on certain topics, the interested members sign up for this working group, start working on the issue, start drafting a document, which will then become the output of the working group for consideration of the RSAC or SSAC. But the difference that I can highlight is RSAC has, beyond its members from root server operators and partners managing the root zone, it has a broader group called RSAC Caucus, which is composed of experts on DNS, domain name system, root zone. So RSAC may go to the RSAC Caucus, which is a broader group, and set up the working group as an RSAC working group and leverage from the expertise of these members. And the outcome, again, the outcome document will need to be approved by the RSAC. In SSAC's case, the SSAC working group's outcome is also approved by the SSAC, but this is the only difference that I can highlight. Otherwise, they have a very similar working method.
Thank you, Ozan. I would like to read loudly the message which posted by Carlos Reyes, who is also the colleague from Policy Team. So as Chantal and Ozan have shared, the policy development processes of the supporting organizations provide for discussions between the ICANN board and the council of the supporting organization to clarify any policy recommendation. Expedited policy development processes, EPDPs, have fewer steps at the beginning, and the actual phase of work is not abbreviated. Thanks, Carlos, for additional note. We have hand raised by Ahmad. Ahmad, if you can unmute yourself and go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Siranush. Good morning, everybody. My question is, during the meetings of ICANN and before that, following up with ICANN a little bit, I've noticed that many of the required policies take a relatively long time to develop, which is understandable considering the way the policy is being developed. But that's becoming more and more of a problem because the internet is moving fast, and the general community using the internet is moving faster, and there are so many things that are being introduced on a daily basis. Is there an effort to expedite the policy development process in a much faster way to make in order to catch up with the new developments every day? Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad. Ozan, would you like to take this question? Or your hand is raised? It's for previous question. So who would like to take?
It was for the previous question, Siranush.
Okay.
I'll check with my colleague Chantal, see if she would like to take this up, or let me go.
Siranush, thank you, Ozan. Siranush, could you repeat the question, please? I was catching up in the chat.
Ahmad, can you just briefly tell what was your specific question?
Yes, sure. So the question was, is there an initiative or a process being worked on right now to make the policy development process much faster than it is currently, in order to catch up with the continuous changes that are happening with the internet nowadays?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. So there's two things that I think are worth pointing out here. One is PDP 3.0, which looks at ways to improve the policy development process. The other is something the GNSO is working on, which is comes out of the ATRT3 review, and it's a pilot project related to the continuous improvement. And I can't remember the full name, but the acronym is CCOICI, which is a mouthful. The issues are complex, but there are initiatives to look at how we can improve the process. And there's also what's called a consensus playbook, which outlines how consensus policy is developed at ICANN, and we can also share that link with you. But I have a sense that the fellows are doing a training on that as well.
We already did.
Thank you, Siranush.
Yeah, thank you, Chantal. And Carlos pointed out in the chat that actually the ICANN board does not approve the initiation of any PDP or EPDP. And the recommendations of any PDP or GNSO EPDPs still go to the ICANN board for consideration, but they are not approved. They do not approve. The board does not approve the initiation of any PDPs. And I would like to go to the next question posted in the chat by Nojus. Can ESSAC develop reports and advisories for a particular issue at the same time? And when each one is developed? As far as I understand, if there is any report developed by ESSAC, and when they develop those reports for a particular issue.
Siranush, this is Ozan.
Yes, Ozan, please.
So ESSAC reports usually are published as an outcome of their advice development process. So again, they follow the process that I highlighted during the presentation. So Chantal, I don't know if you are able to go back to slide 24, but again, it all starts with the policy development process and identifying there's an issue. So it can be the ICANN board reaching out to ESSAC to work on a particular issue, or another supporting organization or advisory committee contacting ESSAC, or it can be ICANN organization. So if ESSAC agrees to review the issue, then it starts with setting up a work party, working on it, and the work party drafts a document for ESSAC's review, and then ESSAC publishes it as its advice. So the frequency of these reports would depend on how ESSAC views there's an issue to work on and such. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. If any follow-up, Nojus, on this, if you would like, you can take the mic.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. Thank you so much, Siranush.
Yes, please. Thank you. So Alexia put in the chat that thank you for allowing so much time for our questions. That's why we are planning special sessions for fellows and next geners to be able to ask that many questions directly to the people who are in charge of facilitating that process. Thank you, Alexa, for your comment. I don't see any hand raised, and I have read all the questions posted in the chat. Like, this is the last call for any questions, if you have any. So use this opportunity to ask Chantel or Ozan your questions.
Siranush, while we're waiting to see if there's any final questions, I'm going to post the link into the chat, but I want to flag to you the policy outlook report for ICANN 73, which gives an overview of all the different SO and ACs that we covered today. And it can give you an overview of what the current work is. And then as you see on the screen, and my colleague Ariel shared earlier in the chat, we also have the GNSO policy briefing, which will go into further detail about the policy development processes and other work that the GNSO is working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantel. And well, thanks for all the links from you, from Ozan, and from Ariel. And there was a question from Samik in the chat. Can a policy be scrapped? And what's the process for it? Samik, if you can elaborate on this a bit more.
What I mean is, like, if a policy is already implemented, and if it gets outdated, or there's criticism about it, or can it be scrapped, and how do you process that, you know?
Is there a specific process for it, Chantel or Ozan?
Thank you, Ozan. I'll try to answer, and then please jump in if you think of anything to elaborate. Scrapping, that's a great question. Scrapping would have to be a community decision. We can revisit policies, and that has to be a community decision. And again, the transfer policy is a great example of that, because when the register agreements were first initiated in 1999, there was no consensus policy. But the consensus policy, when it was established, is one of the oldest at ICANN. So now it's currently being revisited and reopened because of GDPR and the new privacy legislations that are coming out from various governments. So I hope that helps answer. And then Ozan, if you have anything else to add, please feel free.
Nope, nothing to add, Chantal. Thank you. That was perfect.
Thank you. I don't see any additional questions. Much appreciation from the participants to all of you for your time and for answering that many questions. I would like also to thank our interpreters and the tech support for this session, for supporting this session. Definitely all fellows will receive the follow-up with the issue. If it is not implemented, this PowerPoint is available with all the links showed there in the meeting schedule under this particular session, with all the links. As I don't see any questions and don't see meeting schedule under this particular session, with all the links. As I don't see any questions, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for participation.
Recording stopped.